Hello! Welcome to Impersonal Opinion, the show where we don't take our opinions personally. This is meant to be a safe show where everyone should be able to share their honest opinions without fear, blame, hate, or censorship. And we have a lot of impersonal opinions today. I'm here with David Joseph, Jamie Soden, and George Ortega. And there's a story that Jamie brought up about I can't remember the name of that girl now. What we've been saying it anyway, but basically there was a case involving um these two girls that were on the same basketball team that were in some kind of lesbian relationship, but as soon as the girl turned from 17 to 18, the parents wanted to prosecute her as a sex offender. And it's kind of a strange case because these are two teenage girls that apparently there was no bullying or coercion, any thing like that. So there's no actual abuse being happening as far as we know, and so it's kind of a weird topic, and it raises the issue of age of consent laws that Jamie's brought up before. Um, and this idea, it relates to so many things because it relates to people's idea about the legal age when somebody can consent to something. It relates to people's views about sexuality and exactly what is child abuse or not. And so I was hoping that each of us could perhaps just share our impersonal opinions about this topic. Who would like to, does anyone have something to say about this?
I can start like with the free will perspective. So like, yeah, I may not agree with what the parents did, but then I also have to understand that they can't be blamed either. In other words, like there's a reason why they're homophobic. There's a reason why they don't want their daughter to be gay and all. And so you can't really blame them for that. Um, I guess also legally, while the girls were 17, they couldn't do anything about it. And, once the one girl turned 18, they're trying to like guide their daughter to a path that they kind of like feel is right. Because they could be very religious people. For very religious people, this is a very, very um, important, powerful topic. So like while I may not agree with their tactic and their position, you have to also have, compassion and understanding toward them.
Yes, I agree, George, because one of the problems that happens is in all these controversial cases, people are blaming people, you know, and in this whole topic, I mean, we understand that nobody has a free will and that there's reasons, there's causes for everything we do, and that nothing's really in our control. And so it's not someone's choice to be gay. It's not somebody's choice to have a belief system that's against gayness. And it's so, yeah, like George, I disagree with this whole thing because the way they are prosecuting somebody without there being an actual case of abuse or something harmful, but we can't blame them. um but I think this opens up a discussion of exactly what's going on, and it would be nice if when people were talking about these important issues of age of consent or homosexuality and what parents think is right for their children and all that, if people could do it without the blame. Jamie, I know you have a lot of thoughts about this age of consent.
Yeah, because first and foremost, this is the obvious thing. It was put in place for to stop adults exploiting, underage, kids and all that stuff, because that's wrong. It damages them. All sorts of problems can arise from this. Um, they can become depressed. They get, don't they get nightmares from it? I think they do. They get nightmares from, after they've been raped by someone. But when we're talking about like, you know, teenagers going out of other teenagers, that's a different matter entirely. And I think there needs to be special laws in place to stop like teenagers getting registered as you know offenders for like going out of having sex with a partner that's not much younger than they are. I think there needs to be some sort of law to compensate for that, George. And
That's a great point, Jamie. Yeah, in other words, like this was a very unique relationship in that they were both 17 when the relationship started. So in the cases like that, when one turns 18, I think that it should be illegal what the parents did. In other words, like if the relationship started when they were both minors and then one person turns, adult, whatever, I think that the criteria should be based on the fact that they were both minors when it started. So yeah, I don't think they should have a case then. Yeah.
the way I remember the case, I think she was 17 when the relationship started, and her partner was 14. But the age difference is only 3 years, and plus, if I if I my memory serves me correctly, there was no blackmailing or bullying involved in this. So, where's the manipulation? Where's the deviance in what this girl did? I don't see it.
Well, I mean, actually, I didn't know. So there's one girl was 17, the other one's 14. In my mind, that raises a question. In other words, like, does a 14-year-old have the same kind of like capacity for making decisions as a 17-year-old? They're both minors. For example, like, it would be clear, like, if one person was like, let's say 9 and the other was 17, I think we would see very clearly the immorality of the 17-year-old, even though
Exactly.
they're both minors. So like, but with 14, it's a very gray area, and like, she could be a very immature 14-year-old. So her parents might be like very, very,
Yes, 17-year-old. I mean, the 17-year-old could have a very immature mind. You know.
well, both, yeah.
Yeah.
This question of maturity has always fascinated me, and what's actually meant by maturity. Um, because here's an interesting thought. Now, let's supposing that this was this some kind of relationship between somebody who's the younger person is 18 and the older person is 21. Now, would people still feel the same way about that as they do the 17 and the 14-year-old?
Exactly. Or yeah, or I mean, if the age of consent is 18, how about even like not even 21, but like 19 or something? Yeah, that's a great point, Chandler.
Yeah, but since
Yeah.
since neuroscience has told us, right? Because I read some articles a while back. I haven't like completed reading them yet. I've just read pieces of the articles plus seen the headline. Um, Neuroscience has proven that adulthood starts at 25. That's what they've been saying. Now, if this is the case, then wouldn't that mean that we'll need to raise not just the age of consent, but also the age for drinking, the age for driving, the age for voting, stuff like that? I mean, uh, and how do you enforce these laws, George? I mean, that's the big problem. How would you enforce them?
That's a great point because, like, like in many countries, I think here in the United States, in like the Vietnam War, kids were being drafted into the war at 18,
Mm,
and like, so, that's a very interesting question. So like,
mm,
I'm not sure, like 25. In other words, there's some very successful, I think 21, 22, 23-year olds, especially with the internet age, excuse me,
yeah.
that so like, it's a hard question. I don't, Jamie, I don't know if I have an answer.
Yeah, I haven't finished reading them all yet, but the thing is, this is what psychology's been, you know, they've been saying that psychological and neuroscientific evidence, with frontal lobe development and all that stuff, they've been saying that it peaks around the age of 25, like, or maybe a little before it. I don't know,
All
but
right, well, here's the
yeah,
well, Jamie. So it peaks at 25. So like, I mean, I think maybe they can establish a criteria for when a teenager or young adult would have not a peak in it, but like enough emotional maturity to be able to make adult decisions.
mm, yeah. So that's why I said to Chandler. For me, adulthood starts at a minimum of 21. That's my view on it. You know, because there's a lot of mature 18-year-olds, but then you got a lot of like immature ones as well. Some of them make really stupid decisions, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and this whole question of maturity and when someone's an adult, it really strikes me as kind of interesting because I don't feel like an adult and I'm 28. So I think you have to be like 30 to be an adult.
And even more so, Chandler, there's people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s that they are so immature. In other words, like their denial of climate change, so many of their political positions are so immature. So like, it seems like chronological age and maturity are not, necessarily so you know, corresponding. That there seem to be other criteria that explain that.
And I think it's about experience, George, because when somebody's 18, usually they've been in some form of high school, some kind of public school or private school, maybe homeschooled. But basically, all they are at that point is somebody who's just have these ideas drilled into them, like, you must believe this, this is the right answer to this. And they have not learned any critical thinking skills up until that point. And so usually what happens is there's a massive life change in the next 4 years from the time when people are 18 through 22. A lot of them, they go to college, they learn about new subjects in college, or either that or they join the military or they get some job or something like that that changes their whole worldview. There's massive changes that happen in later teens, early 20s. And I think that needs to be taken into account because somebody might think something is a good idea when they're just fresh out of high school and they're 18, but then that when they're 21 or 22, they might be a totally different person.
Yeah, an example of teenagers making daft decisions would be Justin Bieber. I mean, he did a illegal drag racing, if my memory serves me correct, and he spat on his fans, didn't he? So, and he's like he was 18 or 19 at the time. I'm not like he was definitely in his teens. I'm pretty sure. Wasn't he Chandler Klebs? Wasn't Justin Bieber a teenager around that time?
Well, you know what? I know nothing about Justin Bieber. I mean, all the teenage girls know about Justin Bieber, but I don't.
Yeah. What about you, George?
No, I've just seen a few pictures of him. I don't think I've even. He's a singer, right?
And he's Canadian.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
Canadian.
no, I haven't. So,
Yeah, he's really young, and he made some stupid decisions, but as far as I'm aware, he stopped doing them for the time being, anyway. And I hope that he doesn't do um, anything illegal in regards to driving vehicles again, because that could be very dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing that's interesting is that this issue of maturity, nobody brings up issues of maturity of like whether a 17-year-old can play a game of chess with a 14-year-old. People don't talk about this maturity and age of consent in relation to playing chess or playing baseball or just having a friend and having conversations. Notice that this topic of what the law should be is always in relation to sexuality. And why do you think that is?
Mm,
that's a good question. I mean, I think it has to like relate to morality. In other words, it could be that like, for example, a 14-year-old chess master might be able to compete fairly with a 25-year-old chess master if the guy's brilliant, but the 14-year-old may not even at that with his brilliance may not have enough emotional maturity to also make adult moral decisions. So like intellect and moral reasoning may be guided by different parts of the brain.
Yeah, and this whole question of morality, well, that's interesting because there's certain things that we don't view as being moral or immoral. It's not we don't consider it a question when someone's playing chess or when they're or just or something else like they're eating a certain food or drinking a certain drink. I mean, we don't consider those decisions as moral decisions. We don't consider them having long-term consequences, and I think that's why sexuality is viewed in terms of morality, moral responsibility, and that gets tied into the free will thing. It gets tied into the legal system because in a lot of cases, yes, it can be serious, Um, and here's an interesting thought I have. Now I understand, like, okay, let's say now if the 17-year-old was a boy, with a 14-year-old girl, well, actually, that would actually seem serious. Like in my mind, that would be more serious because if they're doing something sexual, well, that results in pregnancy, and that gets into a whole load of other topics. But what fascinated me about that particular story, though, is since these are two girls, there are no damaging effects long-term life altering effects that I can see coming from this, and that's why I don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah, I don't. In regards to like people making mature decisions and all that stuff. Now, I don't really have a well thought out view in regards to the age of voting, the age of like smoking and stuff. To be honest, like why are people even smoking the big? Come on, I mean smoking's bad for you, man.
There's a lot of things that people do that's bad for them, and you wonder, well, why are they doing it?
Yeah, it's just silly. I don't think the age of consent or laws relating to people making like adult decisions. I don't think it should be lower than 16. 16 should be the bare minimum, like no matter where. And I think places like Germany and China have it, just a bit too low, George, because uh, at the age of 14, mm, they could be easily manipulated by older men. That's the problem. So
It's
Yeah,
interesting. Go ahead,
so
Dennis.
you were mentioning age of consent being too low. See if you can jog my memory, Jane.
it was too low in Germany and China. I think the age of consent being 14 over there, that allows for minors to be manipulated, by.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Now I remember what I was going to say. Okay. So are you saying that, say, a 21-year-old couldn't be manipulated?
I'm not saying a 21-year-old could be manipulated. No, I'm saying a 14-year-old could be manipulated by older men or women. Someone's over the age of 21. I mean, you got to see the difference there, man. There's a big difference in maturity there, man.
Sure. I mean, I think it depends on a lot to do with the balance of power in a relationship. So if you have like a teacher or a boss or someone like that, then the balance of power isn't as equal as it should be. And I think that's what the law is there for. It's to protect people from that balance of power and that way of being manipulated. And I think that can happen at any age, really. It doesn't have to just be, under the age of the age of consent.
Right. I mean, there can be somebody.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. What I was saying is there can be a problem where somebody's bullying somebody into some kind of a sexual thing at any age. I mean, that could be happening at any age, no matter what the age difference, including between even like say there was one person who's 47 and someone else is 44. You can still have that problem even then. And so my concern isn't actually so much about the age of consent, but about, is harm being done? Is somebody being bullied into doing something that they don't want to do? That's my question.
Exactly, that's the issue.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's the more common sense approach.
So that's why I believe, in regards to consent laws, David Joseph, common sense should be exercised. We need psychologists to interview both parties involved and to investigate the case thoroughly to make sure no drugs, bullying, blackmail, etc. were involved.
Exactly. I agree with that. I think that's a good idea. I mean, I was watching a documentary on this called "Are All Men Pedophiles?" I know it doesn't apply to the lesbian relationships, but
Chandler,
it kind
Chandler,
of.
I'm sorry, Chandler. Nick wants to join us. Could you add him to the call?
Yeah, I'll see if I can add him.
Sure. Sorry, guys.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. I'm trying. Okay, it's showing.
I gave you two links involved in it. I mean, one was about the Young Turks talking about it, and another guy was talking about the stupidity involving sex laws. Where
all right, I'm here. I'm just listening. Hey, what's up?
Hey.
Sorry,
I
Nick.
know.
Yeah, me and Chandler were just talking about an important issue, something to do with common sense not being used in our legal system, where teenage relationships happen.
Yeah, what's interesting is people focus on laws about, well, this is allowed at this age and all that. But people are, I guess it's a little bit more complicated than that. It's not like every situation. For example, in America, you can drive a car, you can get a license and drive a car when you're 16. But does that mean that all 16-year-olds are equally good drivers? I don't think so. And so the situation is different with each person.
Yeah, some 16-year-olds are rational, some are not. You can't just define maturity by the age. I mean, age is only part of it, but I do believe some 16-year-olds can make mature decisions. It just depends on a number of factors, really, don't it, David?
Well, I think some 16-year-olds can obviously drive, and I mean, they could have an accident that completely destroys the rest of their lives, and yet they can't consent to an act that probably won't do much damage to them, or any damage at all, really. I just don't see it. So.
Yeah, well, here's an interesting thought. Think about this: the idea that somebody, like in America, they can drive when they're 16, they can smoke and vote and stuff like that when they're 18, and then they can drink alcohol when they're 21. And I'm like, well, this is kind of interesting because think about it, like, as far as what a difference it makes doing these things or not. Like, which of these is the most dangerous of things? And perhaps they could all be, rather than having separate ages and categories for different things, why can't there be one age when all of these things are, that, or maybe not an age necessarily, maybe it needs to be a better system than that. Maybe it ought to be, there needs to be some extreme test, done to see if people are ready for these things. And and this is my impersonal opinion, obviously, but smoking and drinking alcohol is not good for anybody. So nobody's ready for that at any age.
Well, Chandler, you bring up a very interesting point. In other words, like we do have a driving test. A person needs to demonstrate proficiency in driving. But like, for example, for voting, I think like here in the United States, we had a tradition, especially in the South, where they used voting tests to disenfranchise like minorities and stuff. So like, but what I think that, in other words, like, so for voting, I think, having a test would be problematic. But for being a politician, now that's where I think, like, I think they should be absolutely tested in terms of their intelligence, their critical analysis, and all, because that is a high responsibility. A doctor can't perform medicine unless they go through 12 years and pass their medical exams and stuff. Same with lawyers. So like politicians should absolutely be made to pass tests to ensure that they have the critical analysis skills and compassion and responsibility for the job.
Yeah, that's a good point, George. Because, like, yes, with driving, there are tests. People have to get a learner's permit. They have to learn rules. They have to pass a driving test before they can get a license. And perhaps that is an important thing, to have tests to make sure that somebody is capable of doing a job in the way that society expects them to. Um, so yeah, I think that would make sense. But sadly we don't have those kind of things for other things, like take for example the voting thing that you mentioned. Well, um you know I guess you can vote when you're 18 or whatever, but how, I don't think there is a test or even could be a test for that.
I do agree with your points in Facebook, Chandler. I mean, you said that people who eat meat are basically the same as a murderer. Is that what you said?
Yeah, something like that, Jamie. And because really, as soon as you start understanding the equality of other animals to humans, like if you consider somebody only a murderer if they murder humans, well, then, and that's a lot of people are that way, well, then you only call someone a murderer, if they are intentionally killing humans. But from my perspective, there's a lot of people that they know that these animals are suffering and they are killing someone, and so to me I find that to be truly consistent morally, I have to be vegan, you know, to the best of my possible ability, what finances allows, you know.
Well, Chandler, relative to the free will issue, I mean, like, I believe that it's really, a horrible crime to abuse animals, but we have to remember that, carnists, people who eat meat, do not have a free will. It's actually very unfair to blame them for what the universe or God makes them do. So I'm not sure that, like, labeling them as murderers that has such a very strong emotional, hostile connotation would apply to them. Again, because of the free will issue, they, it's like wrongly blaming them for something that's not in their control.
Well, see, what's interesting about George is I agree with you. See, I'm just not sure how to go about the language of it, because I've brought up in previous podcasts that I can't blame the carnivores, you know, for doing what they're taught, for what society deems acceptable, that they don't actually see a problem with even. So that's the thing about it, is I don't blame them.
I do see your point. People are trying to justify, the slaughter of animals. I mean, some of these animals that are being killed for the meat and stuff, or being killed for leather, some of these animals have been tortured, George. I've actually seen some, videos on YouTube about this, and it's very heartbreaking. I do admit that. And when I get my own place to live, I'll try my best to become vegetarian, but it won't be easy, considering I was raised on meat. You know what I mean? And like George said, Chandler, right? We don't have a free will, so it's hard to overcome a lifestyle. But I'll read out this comment that I wrote for you. I said to Chandler, pro-life views like yours are respectable, Chandler Klebs, but it isn't realistic to expect everyone to be vegetarian on some basis of animals being slaughtered for it. There will always be people who will try to justify it, right or wrong. You can't stop what nature intended.
Okay,
Yeah,
Chamber, I want to correct you. I didn't say that, like, because we don't have a free will, it's right to make changes in our. It's difficult to make changes in our lives. Like becoming vegan or vegetarian. Actually, because we don't have a free will, that kind of like it in a certain sense makes it, or knowing that we don't have a free will kind of helps us in that way. In other words, to the extent we know we don't have a free will, we know that there are reasons for why we're a carnist or a vegetarian or vegan, and by knowing those reasons, I think that empowers us to understand what we have to do in order to change. So I just wanted to make that correction. In other words, like, like not having a free will doesn't make changing harder, because whether we have whether because the same conditions would apply under having a free will or not. But understanding that we don't have a free will, I think, probably makes changing easier.
yes, and I agree, George, because people do change all the time. And like I've said before, I think on previous podcasts, basically it was easier, since I wasn't blaming myself that I grew up in a culture in a certain way, not realizing the suffering that was being done to these animals. So I didn't blame myself. So I'm like, oh, well, now I know, I'll change. There was no blame, self blame, or guilt with this no free will understanding. And so I actually think that change is a realistic thing. It's just that it doesn't happen as quickly as we might like.
Yeah, but I was about to say about your comment on Facebook, Chandler. I agree with some of the stuff you say, but saying that people who eat meat are the same as murderers is a bit like applying a black and white issue to it. You know what I mean? It's almost like slander, because these people are not at fault for their lifestyle, are they, George? Yeah.
Right. Well, here's an interesting way I like to explain it, Jamie. Now, okay, let's take two different types of people who grew up eating meat, and other animal products. That's the way they were raised. One of those people, okay, they see that it's wrong and they change. Another person, they just keep trying to justify it, even though they know that they're causing suffering. They just find some way to justify it. Well, see, neither of those people are to blame. Neither of those people chose to be who they are, to be born where they are, to be taught by the culture what they have. So I'm not blaming either of those people. one person probably has a higher level of empathy than the other person, leading them to do one thing while another person is more narcissistic and figures, that they're more important than anybody else. But I'm not blaming either of them. And so I'm thinking about what George said, when you say that somebody's a murderer, I see how a lot of people, they might take that as that I'm accusing them and blaming them, and I don't mean it to sound that way. It's just that and one thing that's very clear is a lot of people, they fight over the word murder, sort of like they fight over, definition of free will. But by murder, I only mean that somebody, they know that what they're doing is hurting someone, but they're doing it anyway, as opposed to somebody who runs over a squirrel in their car and doesn't even know it.
Chandler, yeah, I think we're out of time on this podcast, but you know what? If you guys want to do another one like with the free will podcast, let's explore how sometimes it's easier because we're excusing people. We're excusing people for murdering and all that. Let's contrast. Is it easier to excuse others or ourselves? Because sometimes when we do wrong, even though we know we don't have a free will, we'll tend to blame ourselves. I think that would be a good topic for discussion.
Yeah,
that's I mean, people have been making excuses the whole while anyway. Even with the free will belief, people still try and make excuses, don't they? So, it doesn't matter whether you believe in free will or not. Excuses are going to be made.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that. So perhaps I should end this one, and then we'll do a free will science religion podcast.
All right.
Okay, you've been listening to Impersonal Opinions with Chandler Klebs, David Joseph, Jamie Soden, and George Ortega, and we talked about a whole bunch of issues and shared our opinions on them. So I hope you've enjoyed this in some way.